The ceremonial blade pressed against Marcus Hale's throat before he could reach the Queen's chamber door. He froze, feeling the cold metal kiss his skin as two Valorian guards materialized from the shadows of the palace corridor. Their silver armor caught the bioluminescent glow of the walls, and their 4 eyes, arranged vertically along their elongated faces, fixed on him with predatory focus. "Identification," the taller guard commanded, her voice a harmonic frequency that made Marcus's chest vibrate. Marcus Hale, diplomatic attaché, Earth Consulate. He kept his hands visible, palms open. "I have clearance to—" "No human has clearance to the Queen's private wing." The blade pressed harder, and Marcus felt a thin line of warmth trickle down his neck. "Especially not tonight. Tonight. The wedding night." Marcus's stomach clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "There's been a security breach in the palace networks. I need to speak with Queen Zyra immediately. It concerns the Krillian threat." The guards exchanged a glance, their antennae twitching in silent communication. The Krylians had been quiet for months, but everyone knew that silence meant planning, not peace. The blade withdrew slightly. "The Queen is preparing for her joining ceremony with Commander Theron," the second guard said, his tone softer but no less firm. "Whatever intelligence you possess can wait until morning." "It can't." Marcus met their eyes, all 8 of them. "The breach originated 30 minutes ago from inside the palace. Someone is transmitting tactical data about the Queen's security detail to an off-world source. If I'm wrong, you can execute me yourself. But if I'm right and we wait, she dies tonight." The guard's antennae went rigid. Marcus knew that look, had studied Valorian body language for 10 years, ever since he first arrived as a junior translator and saw Zyra across a negotiation chamber. Back then she'd been a princess, fierce and untouchable, arguing for Earth's inclusion in the Galactic Council while her own advisors called humans primitive. He'd fallen for her in that moment, watching her defend his species with more passion than his own ambassadors showed.
He never told her. Never could.
She was royalty, destined for a political marriage that would unite 2 of the most powerful military houses in the quadrant. He was just Marcus Hale from Detroit, a linguist who'd gotten lucky with an aptitude for xenolinguistics. Loving her was something he did in silence, in the small moments when she'd seek his counsel on human idioms or laugh at his terrible attempts to pronounce Valorian honorifics. "Show us the data," the first guard demanded. Marcus pulled out his tablet, calling up the network logs he'd been monitoring. As Earth's liaison for communication systems integration, he had access to the palace's information infrastructure. He'd been running routine security checks when he spotted it, an elegant bit of code designed to look like standard telemetry but actually packaging and compressing tactical information. Guard rotations, weapon placements, the Queen's precise location at any given moment. The guards leaned in, their faces grave as they scanned the evidence. "This transmission pattern," the second one murmured. "It's keyed to the ceremonial timeline. Someone knows exactly when the Queen will be most vulnerable. During the joining ritual," Marcus confirmed, "when she'll be in the sacred chamber with only Commander Theron and the High Priest. No guards, no weapons. Just tradition." The first guard's hand moved to her communication crystal. "We need to alert." She never finished. The crystal in her palm exploded in a shower of blue sparks, and she dropped it with a hiss of pain.
Both guards immediately drew their weapons, forming a protective stance around Marcus.
Down the corridor, the bioluminescent panels began dying one by one, darkness advancing toward them like a living thing. "They know we found them," Marcus whispered. "The Queen," the second guard said urgently. "We have to." The door to Zyra's chamber burst open. She stood in the doorway, her ceremonial robes shimmering with embedded starlight, her silver skin marked with the traditional wedding patterns that swirled across her face and down her arms. Her eyes, the color of deep space, widened at the scene. "What is happening?" Her voice carried the weight of command, but Marcus heard the threat of fear underneath. "Your Majesty, return to your chamber and seal the—" The first guard began, but Zyra was already moving past her, past them all, her gaze locked on Marcus. "You're bleeding." She reached up, her fingers stopping just short of the cut on his throat, and in that moment Marcus saw something in her expression he'd never allowed himself to imagine. Concern, yes, but deeper. Familiar, as if she'd been watching him too all these years, in moments he hadn't noticed. Then the lights went out completely, and the palace alarms began to scream. Somewhere in the darkness, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of Krillian plasma weapons charging. The wedding wasn't the target, he realized with sudden, terrible clarity. The wedding was the distraction. The real attack had already begun. The guards moved instantly, their training overriding panic. One grabbed the queen while the other seized Marcus, and they were moving, running through corridors that Marcus knew by heart from 10 years of walking them alone at night when he couldn't sleep for thinking about her. The palace shook with explosions, distant but growing closer. Through the windows he glimpsed ships descending through Valor Prime's atmosphere, their hulls marked with the spiral insignia of the Krillian Dominion. "The command center!" Zyra gasped as they ran. "We need to reach—" Compromised, the first guard cut her off. "All primary locations are compromised. They have our complete layout." Because of the data breach, Marcus thought. Because someone had been feeding them information for weeks, maybe months. Long enough to plan this perfectly. They burst into a service corridor, one of the narrow passages used by palace staff. The guard in the lead suddenly stopped, her weapon raised. Ahead, blocking their path, stood Commander Theron. Zyra's intended husband, the warrior who was supposed to join his house with hers in an hour, stood in full battle armor, a plasma rifle aimed directly at the queen's heart. "I'm sorry, Zyra," Theron said, and he actually sounded regretful, "but the old houses are dying. The Krillians offer strength, evolution. Your commitment to these fragile alliances with primitive species like the humans has weakened valor. It ends tonight." Zyra straightened, pulling free from the guard's protective grip. Even facing betrayal and death, she looked regal, unbreakable. You would murder your own queen for power? For the future. Theron's finger moved to the trigger. "Your death will be quick. A mercy, really." Marcus moved without thinking, pushing past the guards, putting himself between the rifle and Zyra. The movement was instinct, 10 years of unspoken love crystallizing into a single simple truth. He would die before he let anything happen to her. Theron laughed, a harsh sound. The human pet? How fitting. You die first, then. The rifle fired. Marcus braced for impact, for the burning dissolution of plasma. Instead, he heard a metallic clang and felt himself knocked sideways. The first guard had thrown her shield in front of them, the ancient ceremonial barrier absorbing the blast. She was already moving, closing the distance to Theron with impossible speed. The corridor erupted into violence. The guards engaged Theron while more Krillian soldiers poured in from both ends of the passage. Marcus found himself pressed against the wall with Zyra, her hand gripping his arm with surprising strength. Around them, the battle was brutal and efficient, the guards fighting with the desperate precision of protectors who knew they were outnumbered. "This way," Zyra hissed, pulling him toward a nearly invisible seam in the wall. A hidden passage. Of course the palace would have them. She pressed her palm to a sensor, and the wall slid open, revealing a narrow shaft that led downward into darkness. "The sanctuary passages," she explained, already climbing into the shaft. Old escape routes from the founding era. "Only the royal family knows them." Marcus followed, hearing the sounds of battle fade as the walls sealed behind them. They descended in darkness, the shaft barely wide enough for their shoulders, relying on handholds that Zyra seemed to know by touch. His hands found the same grip seconds after hers left them, and he focused on that, on following her, on not thinking about how the entire palace was under attack and they were climbing down into the guts of the structure with no weapons and no backup. "Where does this lead?" he asked, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "The Undercity. The old Valor, before we built upward." Her voice came from below, steady despite their circumstances. "There are vehicles there, communication arrays the Krillians won't know about. We can rally loyal forces, organize a counterattack. If there are any loyal forces left," Marcus thought but didn't say. If the betrayal went deep enough, if Theron had brought enough of the military houses with him, they might be climbing toward nothing but more enemies. His hand slipped on a grip slick with moisture, and he fell, sliding down the shaft until he crashed into Zyra. They tumbled together, landing hard on a stone floor. Pain shot through Marcus's shoulder, but he forced himself up, checking Zyra first. "I'm fine," she said, already standing. The shaft was shorter than I remembered. They stood in a vast chamber carved from raw rock, lit by patches of bioluminescent fungus that had grown wild in the decades since this place was abandoned. Ancient Valorian architecture rose around them, buildings and monuments from a time before spaceflight, before the Galactic Council, when Valor Prime was just one planet struggling to unite its warring factions. Zyra moved through the ruins with surprising confidence, and Marcus realized she must have explored down here as a child. The thought made his chest ache, imagining her young and curious, discovering secrets in the dark while he was still on Earth, unaware that somewhere in the galaxy she existed. There, she pointed to a structure that looked more intact than the others. The old royal garrison. If the emergency protocols still work, we can access the planetary defense network from there. They ran across the ancient plaza, their footsteps echoing off stone. Marcus kept glancing up, half expecting Krillian soldiers to come pouring down the shaft, but the attack seemed focused on the upper palace, for now at least. They were alone. The garrison door opened to Zyra's touch, the old biometric sensors still recognizing royal DNA even after centuries. Inside, dusty equipment lined the walls, and in the center of the room stood a command console that looked like it belonged in a museum. "This is older than some Earth civilizations," Marcus muttered, watching Zyra power up the system. "But still functional." Her hands moved across the interface with practiced efficiency. The old systems were built to last. Unlike modern security, which Theron apparently compromised completely. The console flickered to life, displaying a tactical map of Valor Prime. Marcus's stomach dropped. Red markers indicating Krillian forces covered nearly a third of the capital city. The palace was completely surrounded. "They've been planning this for months," Zyra said quietly. The wedding was just the perfect moment. Maximum disruption, all the noble houses gathered in one place. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Marcus saw the weight of understanding in her eyes.
You saved my life, Marcus.
If you hadn't found that breach, I would have walked into the ceremony chamber and never walked out. I just did my job. The words felt inadequate, but what else could he say? That he'd been watching over her for 10 years? That every security protocol he'd implemented was designed with her safety as the primary objective? That he'd memorized her schedule, her habits, not out of obsession, but out of love so profound it had become a second nature? Zyra stepped closer. "Your job doesn't typically involve getting your throat cut by my guards or throwing yourself in front of plasma fire meant for me." Marcus touched the cut on his neck, which had mostly stopped bleeding. It seemed like the thing to do at the time. Why? She was close enough now that he could see the bioluminescent patterns on her skin shifting with her elevated heartbeat. "Why would you risk everything for me? We barely know each other beyond our professional duties." The console behind her began chiming an alert. Enemy forces advancing. Time running out. In the chaos and the danger, with everything falling apart, Marcus found he didn't have the energy to keep lying. "Because I've loved you since the first day I saw you," he said simply. 10 years ago, when you were Princess Zyra arguing with the Council about Earth's membership. I was just a translator, completely out of my depth, but I watched you stand up for my species when we had nothing to offer you in return. You were fierce and brilliant, and so beautiful it hurt to look at you. And I fell completely, hopelessly in love." Zyra stared at him, her expression unreadable. The console's alert grew more insistent. "I never said anything," Marcus continued, the words spilling out now. "What was the point? You were royalty, destined for Theron or someone like him. I was just a human in the corner, useful for my technical skills and my diplomatic connections. So I loved you in silence. Made sure the systems that protected you never failed. Volunteered for extra shifts when you had public appearances. Learned everything I could about Valorian culture so I could understand your world better. It was enough, just being near you. Watching you lead. Watching you build alliances and defend the innocent. It was enough." "Marcus," she whispered, and there was something breaking in her voice. "Your Majesty, we need to—" He turned back to the console, but she caught his arm. 10 years. Her grip tightened. 10 years you've been in love with me, and I thought... She laughed, a sound edged with something like pain. "I thought you were simply the most professional human in the diplomatic corps. Always present, but never forward. Always helpful, but never seeking favor. Do you know how rare that is? How precious?" The console's alert turned red. Enemy forces breaching the Undercity access points. "They have minutes, maybe." "I need to tell you something," Zyra said urgently. "Before we run, before we fight, before whatever happens next, I need you to know that these past 10 years, you've been the one constant in my life. The one person who expected nothing from me except that I be myself. The one conversation I looked forward to in every endless day of protocols and politics. I thought you were just incredibly dedicated to your work. I never imagined Your Majesty," Marcus said gently, because hope was a dangerous thing when death was approaching fast. "You don't have to," I convinced myself I was marrying Theron for duty, she interrupted. "For the Alliance, for Valor's future. But the truth I wouldn't admit was that I was giving up on the one thing I wanted, because I thought it was impossible. I thought you saw me as just another assignment." Marcus felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "Zyra, every time you said your majesty with such careful formality, I died a little," she said. "Every time you attended my public functions and stood in the back, watching over me with those observant eyes, I wondered what you were thinking. If you saw me at all, or just the crown." "I saw you," Marcus said hoarsely. "Only you. Always you." She kissed him then, bridging the distance between queen and commoner, between Valorian and human, between 10 years of silence and 1 moment of truth. Her lips were cooler than human temperature but soft, and she tasted like the starlight embedded in her ceremonial robes. Marcus's hands found her face, careful of the wedding patterns painted on her skin, and kissed her back with everything he'd never allowed himself to feel. The consul's alarm reached a crescendo. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and turned to face the tactical display. Krillian soldiers were converging on their location, guided by sensors Marcus now realized had never stopped tracking them. They'd been herded here, trapped in the Undercity with no way out. "They're going to kill us," Zyra said matter-of-factly. "Probably." Marcus studied the map, his mind racing through possibilities. Then he saw it, a detail that sparked an idea so risky it bordered on suicidal. He pointed to a marker on the map, a power junction that fed the entire Undercity. When they abandoned this section, they left the old fusion cores running on minimal power, mostly to keep the bioluminescent systems alive, preserve the historical sites. But those cores were designed for a city's worth of power consumption. Right now, they're barely ticking over. Zyra followed his logic immediately, her eyes widening. If we overload them, the blast would be contained by the rock formations, directed upward through the access shafts. It would devastate the lower palace levels, but leave the upper structure mostly intact. Marcus pulled up the fusion core controls, his hands already working the interface. "Anyone in the Undercity when it blows would be vaporized." "Including us," Zyra pointed out. "Including us," Marcus agreed. "Unless we can reach the maintenance tunnels. They're shielded, designed to protect workers during core maintenance. If we make it there before the overload reaches critical, we might survive. Might. Better than definitely dying here."
He started the overload sequence, watching the core temperature begin climbing.
"We've got 4 minutes." They ran, leaving the garrison behind as the ancient fusion cores woke from their long slumber and began building toward catastrophic failure. The Undercity trembled, dust shaking loose from the ceiling. Behind them, Marcus heard the Krillian soldiers entering the plaza, their harsh voices calling coordinates. The maintenance tunnel entrance was across the Undercity, past structures that had stood for millennia and would soon be reduced to atomic vapor. Zyra ran like she'd been born to it, her ceremonial robe streaming behind her, and Marcus pushed his human body to keep pace. His lungs burned, his injured shoulder screaming, but he focused on her silver form ahead of him and ran. The ground shook harder now, and cracks appeared in the ancient stone. The bioluminescent fungus was dying, poisoned by the radiation beginning to leak from the cores. They burst into a narrow street, ancient dwellings on either side, and found themselves face to face with a squad of Krillian soldiers. The warriors raised their weapons, but before they could fire, the nearest building collapsed, tons of stone crushing half the squad. Zyra and Marcus ducked through the chaos, using the destruction as cover. 1 minute. Marcus could see the maintenance tunnel entrance now, a reinforced door marked with ancient warning symbols. They were going to make it. Against all odds, they were actually going to make it. Then Zyra stumbled, her leg giving out. Marcus caught her, saw the plasma burn on her calf that she must have taken in the soldier encounter. Her face was pale, her breathing labored. "Go," she said. "You could still make it." "Not a chance." Marcus pulled her arm over his shoulders, taking her weight, and staggered toward the tunnel door. 30 seconds. 20. He got her to the entrance, his fingers fumbling with the door mechanism. Behind them, the plaza had become an inferno, the fusion core's containment beginning to fail. The door opened. Marcus practically threw Zyra inside and dove after her, slamming the door as the world outside exploded into light and fury. The shielded tunnel held, but barely. The walls buckled, the floor heaved, and Marcus covered Zyra with his body as the universe tried to tear itself apart around them. The roar was deafening, apocalyptic, the sound of a civilization's history being erased in nuclear fire. Then silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Marcus raised his head slowly. The emergency lighting in the tunnel had activated, bathing everything in dim red. Zyra lay beneath him, her eyes open, alive. They'd survived. "Well," she said weakly. "That was Dramatic. Marcus laughed, a sound halfway to hysteria. Did we just destroy the Undercity of Valor? The Historical Preservation Society is going to be very upset with us. Zyra tried to sit up, winced at her injured leg. But yes, we just vaporized several thousand years of history and probably 200 Krillian soldiers. Worth it? Absolutely. She cupped his face with her hand, her touch gentle despite everything. But next time you plan a romantic gesture, perhaps something less explosive? Next time, Marcus repeated, letting the words sink in. The implication of a future of more moments together. Unless you've changed your mind about that whole loving me thing, Zyra said, but there was vulnerability in her eyes. Never, Marcus promised, and kissed her again in the wreckage of the old world. The tunnel led to a secondary access point in the merchant district, far from the palace. They emerged into chaos, Valorian citizens running in panic as Krillian ships circled overhead. But the destruction of the Undercity had taken out a significant portion of the invasion force, and more importantly, it had bought time. Zyra limped to a public communication terminal, one of the old ones that still used hardwire connections instead of wireless. She activated it with her royal codes, and her face appeared on screens across the city, across the planet. People of Valor, she said, and her voice rang with authority despite her torn robes and wounded leg. We are under attack. Commander Theron has betrayed us to the Krillian Dominion. But we are not defeated. The old blood of valor runs in us still. The strength that built our civilization from stone and will and honor has not faded. To all loyal forces, rally to the merchant district. To all citizens, shelter in place. And to the Krylians, know this. You have awakened something you cannot defeat. You have reminded us why our ancestors built shields so strong they can contain nuclear fire. You have shown us that the old ways, the hard ways, are sometimes necessary. She paused, and her eyes found Marcus standing beside her. And you have taught us that love is worth fighting for, that bonds chosen freely are stronger than alliances built on convenience, that a single human with courage and skill is worth more than 1,000 traders in armor. Ships began appearing on the horizon, Valorian military vessels whose captains had remained loyal. The tide was turning. Marcus Hale, Zyra said formally, still addressing the planet. Step forward. He did, confused, but trusting her. For 10 years, you have served Valor with distinction. You have protected our interests, strengthened our alliances, and today you saved your queen's life at risk of your own. By the authority of the crown, I name you Defender of the Realm, with all the rights and honors that entails. Marcus blinked. Defender of the Realm. That was a title reserved for the highest warriors, for those who'd shaped Valor's destiny. And, Zyra continued, taking his hand, I announce my intention to join with you in marriage as soon as this crisis is resolved. Because duty and desire need not be opposed, because an alliance of love is the strongest foundation for any union. And because I have wasted 10 years not telling you how I felt, and I will not waste another day. The merchant district erupted in cheers, Valorian citizens responding to their queen's defiance and declaration. Ships filled the sky, loyal forces converging. The battle for Valor Prime was far from over, but the outcome was no longer certain. Marcus looked at Zyra, at the woman who'd been queen and warrior in secret love, now standing beside him not as a distant monarch, but as an equal partner. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. The political implications alone. I'm sure, she said firmly. I've been sure for years. I just didn't let myself acknowledge it. You stood in the shadows protecting me for a decade, Marcus. It's time you stood in the light with me. Then I will, he promised. For as long as you'll have me. Forever, ideally. She smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look young and radiant despite the dirt and blood. Though with your tendency to throw yourself in front of plasma fire, forever might be shorter than I'd prefer. I'll try to be more careful. Liar. She kissed him again, and this time the whole planet was watching. The Krillian invasion collapsed over the following days as loyal forces retook the palace and hunted down Theron's conspirators. The commander himself was found dead in the ceremonial chamber, apparently killed by his own allies when the invasion failed. The Krillian fleet retreated, having underestimated Valor's capacity for resistance, and the Queen's willingness to sacrifice her own historical monuments to protect her people. Marcus stood in the rebuilt throne room, no longer as an observer in the corner, but beside Zyra as she addressed her assembled court. The nobles who'd survived the purge watched with a mixture of approval and uncertainty as their queen explained her choice of consort. Some will say I've diminished the crown by choosing a human, Zira said, that I should have selected another Valorian noble, someone from the great military houses. But those houses nearly destroyed us. Their pride and their plotting brought Krillian ships to our doorstep and traitors into my bedchamber. Marcus Hale brought me the truth at great personal risk. He loved me not for what I could give him, but for who I am. That is the partner I choose. That is the alliance valor needs. The court murmured, but no one openly objected. The recent battle had proven that old assumptions could be deadly, that change was necessary for survival. Later, in the private gardens that had been restored after the battle, Marcus found Zyra standing alone under the triple moons of Valor Prime. She'd shed her formal robes for simpler clothes, and she looked more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, joining her. "About which part? Choosing a human consort, destroying the Undercity, or completely restructuring Valor's political landscape?" "Any of them." "No." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Though I am curious about one thing. In all your years of silent devotion, did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" Marcus looked up at the moons, at the stars beyond where Earth hung as a distant point of light. "Honestly, I imagined it constantly. Every lonely night, every moment I watched you from afar, but I never believed it could be real. You were too far above me, too important, too perfect." "I'm not perfect," Zyra said quietly. "I'm stubborn and proud, and I almost married the wrong person because I thought duty mattered more than happiness. It took nearly dying for me to realize that the life I wanted was standing in the corner all along, watching over me." "I'll always watch over you," Marcus promised, though hopefully with fewer explosions going forward. "We'll see." She turned in his arms, her silver skin glowing in the moonlight. "We still have to deal with the Krillians' eventual counterattack, the political fallout from Theron's betrayal, and the fact that the human diplomatic corps is going to have very strong opinions about one of their attachés marrying into Valorian royalty. One crisis at a time," Marcus said, kissing her forehead. "Agreed." She smiled. "But Marcus, thank you for 10 years of quiet service. For loving me when I couldn't see it, for being exactly who you are. Thank you for finally noticing," he replied. They stood together under alien moons, human and Valorian, commoner and queen, two people who'd found each other across impossible divides. Around them, the palace hummed with activity as Valor rebuilt and reinforced its defenses. Above them, loyal ships patrolled the sky. And between them, decade-old love, finally given voice, transformed into something new, something strong enough to reshape worlds. In the morning, they would face the challenges ahead, navigate the politics of their unprecedented union, and strengthen Valor against future threats. But tonight, they simply stood together, two hearts that had been lonely too long finally finding home. The distance between them, measured in rank and species and unspoken words, had collapsed into nothing. What remained was simple and profound, connection, understanding, and love that had been tested in fire and survived. Zira took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "Stay with me," she said softly. "Not as a guard or an advisor or a diplomat, just as you, as Marcus." "Always," he promised. "That was always the plan." She laughed, the sound carrying across the garden. 10 years is a long time to wait for someone." "You were worth it," Marcus said simply. "You'll always be worth it." And under the light of 3 moons, in a garden rebuilt from war's destruction, the Queen of Valor and the human who'd loved her in silence finally began their story together, not as ruler and subject, but as equals bound by choice and courage and a love that had survived everything the universe could throw against it.